Welcome to OpenD6 Basic Combat, using D6 Adventure skills and attributes. First thing you do in a combat, roll initiative. We have two options. The first option is whoever makes the first significant move goes first, and the order remains unchanged until the end of combat. Second option is you roll perception for each character NPC group and go in order from highest to lowest. You can do that at the beginning of combat once and stay in that order, or you can do it at the beginning of every round. Attacking. You roll your attack skill. Brawling, marksmanship, melee combat, throwing, etc. Your roll must meet or exceed the combat difficulty, plus or minus any modifiers. And the combat difficulty can never be lowered beneath 3. Range modifiers. The vast majority of melee weapons are going to be only useful in the point-blank range, 0 to 3 meters. The first, second, and third value correspond to the values given in your weapons range listing. Defense. Every character has a default defense value of 10, so if you don't take any defensive actions, the character only has to roll a 10, plus or minus any modifiers, to hit you. Active defense. You take an action to dodge, block, or parry your opponent's attacks. You have a full active defense, which means you do only a defensive action on your turn, and you roll your defense, whichever defensive action you want to take, and you add 10 to it. So it's going to be pretty hard to hit you. The second active defense is partial action defense. If you do any other action along with a defense action, you will not only will the multi-action penalty apply, but you only get the roll. You don't get any pluses. So if you try to dodge, you only get what you roll on the dodge roll. Defense continued. Your active defense value will only take place on your turn, and every turn up until your turn comes again in the next round. You cannot move your action up if you're getting attacked. The opponents that go before you will be rolling against your default defense value. If you roll an active defense value that is lower than your default, it still replaces it. According to the book, you have made a mistake and you have made yourself easier to hit. Dodge, block, and parry. Dodge is pretty straightforward. You try to predict where an attack will land and move to avoid it. You roll the dodge skill. Block and parry. You use your body or a melee weapon to stop, block, or deflect, parry, and attack. Roll the relevant skill associated with your weapon. Alright, come down here, and here's some special rules on blocking and parrying. These rules also apply to electrified weapons, but I didn't have room to put it in here, so just remember that electrified weapons also follow these rules. Blocking, parrying an unarmed attack with a bladed weapon, or an electrified weapon, will do only the weapon's damage to the attacker. So if someone tries to punch you and you parry it with a sword, the sword's damage gets done to the attacker, but don't add your strength damage. If an unarmed character blocks or parries a bladed weapon or electrified weapon, they will always take the weapon's damage. And if the opponent rolls over their defensive value, take damage as normal. Cover modifiers. This is pretty straightforward, except that I should explain what the modifier means here. You have 1d and plus 3. So what this means is the game master can either roll 1d, or he can just take the static value of 3. And that goes for all of them. Instead of rolling 2d, you can just take 6. If you don't feel like rolling, you can just add a 6 to the value. Come down here. If your object is completely 100% hidden behind cover, it says here that enough damage to the cover may indirectly damage the target. But in most cases, you're going to have to get rid of the cover before you can actually hit them. Determining damage. If you're using body points, you subtract the target's armor value from the damage and then subtract the remaining damage from their body points. Very simple. Wounds. The target rolls their physique plus armor value. This is called a resistance roll. And you subtract that total from the damage roll. Any leftover must be compared to the wounds chart to see how much damage is done. No leftover damage means no meaningful damage. So you might have, like, you got hit, but you might have just left a scratch or a scrape. And here's the wound chart. You have technically 5 wounds because dead does not count as a wound level. But it is on here, just so you know. If you roll a 16 or higher, or if there's 16 or higher damage that gets through your defensive roll, you're dead in 1 hit. So that's why it's here. Severely wounded. You'll notice that it has 2 asterisks, and it's also the same range as wounded. It's really just here to pad the wound levels out, I think. I don't think there's actually any other reason for that. If after your if your if your resistance roll is low and you have 4 damage get through, you're not going to go to severely wounded, you're going to go to wounded first. And then if you take more damage, you will go to severely wounded. No, go back. And here are the wound rules that you have to go by. If a character doesn't have any wounds, or the rolled wound is higher than his current level, the rolled wound becomes his current level. So if you're stunned and you roll, if you roll incapacitated, incapacitated is your new wound level. If a character rolls a wound level lower than or equal to your current wound level, you move to the next wound level. So if you're wounded and you roll stunned, you move to severely wounded. And here are the wound level effects. The only one we really need to go over is stunned. I'm not sure if the game master or the player gets to choose. I'm pretty sure it'll be the game master. But there's 2 options for stunned. The character either gets minus 1d for all remaining actions this round and the next, or may only defend or retreat in the next round. So you have 2 options for stunned. Wounded and severely wounded are pretty straightforward. On to the next one. So here we have incapacitated and mortally wounded. We'll talk about mortally wounded because this one's pretty simple. So I'll read it. The character is knocked unconscious with no chance to stay up. Roll the character's physique each round. The character finally dies if the roll is less than the number of rounds a character has been mortally wounded. So, the reason there's an asterisk here is because in the book, in fact, in all of them, in D6 Adventure, D6 Space, and D6 Fantasy, all of them say minutes, which that doesn't work. Because if you're in rounds, there's 12 rounds to a minute. Each round is only 5 seconds. So you can see how the math doesn't really work. Long story short, I went through some of the older OpenD6 content and I found a version of mortally wounded that said rounds instead of minutes, which is what I assumed it was supposed to be anyway. So that's the reason I put rounds there. And I obviously didn't put dead in there, but if you're dead, obviously. Optional modifiers. So we have bonus damage. Subtract the defensive value of the target from the successful attack roll. Divide the leftover by 5, rounding up, and add the result to the damage roll. So 1/5 of the extra of the result points are going to be extra damage. Round it up. All right, and here is a optional defense modifier. And this is kind of, there's a lot of text here, as you can see. For every 2d in reflexes or dodge above 4d, round up, the passive defensive value gets a +1. For every 2d in acrobatics above 4d, round up, add a +1 to the active or passive defense value for attacks at short range or greater. For every 6 ranks in a skill bonus or increased attribute special ability that affects reflexes, dodge, or acrobatics, add a +1 as specified for the skill in question. So this isn't as scary as it looks. Really, you only need your passive defense value and the active and passive defense value at short range and greater. So you only need those. You shouldn't have to have any more numbers than that. And you'll be able to quickly memorize them. It's just a lot of words you got to get through. Okay, so optional modifiers continued. We have initiative modifiers. For every 2d over perception in search, round down. We're rounding down this time. They're not as generous for initiative. Or 4d in reflexes, round down, add +1. For every 6 ranks in a skill bonus or increased attribute special ability that affects reflexes, add +1. All right. Aiming. You may take no other action but to aim. For each round of uninterrupted aiming, you get a +1d up to a maximum of +3d added to your ranged attack roll. And that's it. Thank you for watching.